Howdy, everybody. It's the Blizzard Watch podcast, and I'm the host, Matt Rossi. With me this week is my amazing co-host, Joe Perez. We're going to talk about stuff involving Blizzard games and so forth, because we kind of took a mulligan week last week and just kind of had fun because it was our 300th episode. But this week, we're back and we're focused on Blizzard and its games. Right now, let's be honest, it's mostly Shadowlands. But I mean, we will have a little Diablo talk in these news stories, but it's mostly Shadowlands right now. Stuff hasn't come out yet. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, we could talk about Hearthstone because they just had an expansion come out, but neither Joe or I play Hearthstone very much, so it probably won't be coming up. I'd love to get a player, someone who plays a lot of Hearthstone, like Corey, on here.
We should do that. We should really do that.
But for right now, how you been doing, Joe? I guess I should ask before we jump into stories, because we just the thing is we just did the pre-show. Every time we do the show, we do a pre-show first. So we've just been talking for like half an hour. So it's like I forget that this is new for some people and we can introduce ourselves and stuff. So yeah, what do you have to do, Joe?
I've been doing a lot more painting. I've been trying to really embrace my vaporwave roots, and I talked about it before. But I just love the color palette and like scheme of like 80s vaporwave, the bright neons, the clashing colors, things like that. And I realized that like a lot of the stuff I've been painting for years is just like it's grimdark. And that's sort of the nature of the beast when you play games like, Warhammer 40K, and that's what people pay you to paint is Warhammer 40K. You tend to paint in that style. So I'm trying to branch out and be more lively and do things like that. And I really have been excited because this big project that I'm working on is an old model that nobody cares about anymore that I just found laying around that I forgot I had purchased from a friend who was moving away years ago. And it was just this big hunk of yellow and rust. And I'm like, this is boring. This could be so much cooler. And it's these big, large volumes and big, round shapes. And I'm really enjoying making this violently purple to pink shifting color scheme. I just found a color match, or a really close color match, to the old 80s gold, which affectionately called Q Gold. I'm not going to get into it, but you can look it up online. There's a whole story there. I love doing that because like it's this rich, warm color that it's not this harsh, bright, tinny color that most other things are. So I'm getting really excited again, and I haven't felt this excited about painting in a little bit because things have been boring. So it's really livening things up, and I'm starting to plan out like decorative bases and how I'm going to do like neon lighting and neon effects and what grid work I'm going to work with. So I've been pretty good and pretty jazzed about that. It's actually been pulling me out of a slump. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. That's how I've been doing. And then Matt was quiet.
Pushing the wrong button this whole time. Sorry, guys. Anyway, top stories. First up is this one's kind of from like a week or so ago because we missed it due to our 300th episode being kind of a retrospective of sorts. But Complexity Limit killed Mythic Denathrius first, so they won the race to world first for Castle Nathria. That's now over. So if you kill him, great, but you're not world first. Sorry. Quite frankly, most of us aren't trying to kill him world first. But nevertheless, that happened. I always feel weird about world first this early in the expansion. Because, we're going to see a lot more content. There's going to be a lot more races. But Denathrius actually took longer than people expected because there was an entire other phase to the fight. I'm going to actually talk to Joe about that. What do you think about them suddenly adding in secret mystery phases for Mythic, or even for for higher difficulty levels? Although they usually don't do it except for Mythic.
They only do it on Mythic, yeah.
The last time I remember them doing it was
Cho'Gall.
Yeah, I was just going to say Cho'Gall and Warlords. So what's your thoughts on that kind of thing?
I like it, actually. This has been my long-standing thing. I think I raid a lot, and I like raids. I will never do mythic raiding. I'm not capable of being in that mental space anymore. But it's one of those things where, like, I like when they do extra stuff like that because it's fun. It's a surprise, and I think it keeps things fresh. Because one of the things that I thought was always weird is when you moved from normal to heroic and heroic to mythic, nothing changed, really. Like, in heroic, you got more abilities, and maybe in mythic, they added an ability or two, maybe. And it was just ostensibly the same fight. When you get to the big boss at the end, throwing a curveball, throwing an extra phase or something in there, I think feels climactic. As long as it's not some big, massive lore thing that's kept from everybody that plays the game, I'm fine with it. But I think it's really cool. I think it's neat when they do stuff like
What I think about when I think about this kind of things, of course, that it is content that the vast majority of us are never going to see. But it's one boss fight, so it's not that big a deal. I do think it's. I read somewhere someone made an interesting point that for some MMOs like Final Fantasy, for example, the default assumption is that the canon encounter is the one that most players get to see. It's the baseline. Whereas for WoW, the canon encounter is the mythic one that very few players will get to see. If they do something special or unique at the end of an encounter like this, that's something that is only there for relatively few players are ever going to get to look. I think for World of Warcraft, it's kind of in a place where it's trying to it's trying to discern its identity again after like being like so big for so long. The past 4 years, I think WoW has been very open and very almost like I wrote a post. I don't know when it'll go live, but I wrote a post today basically speculating that for a long time WoW was basically it's just Skyrim to me. I've been playing it like a single player game this whole time. I wasn't until Shadowlands. I was not doing group content. Period. I would occasionally drop into my raid with my guild, but very rarely. And otherwise, I did everything solo. And ironically, Shadowlands is the expansion where I've been doing a lot more group content. I've been raiding more. I've been doing a lot more dungeons. I've done more mythics than I ever had. The only mythics I did in Battle for Azeroth was the one I tanked to get to see the end of the Jaina Proudmoore storyline. And that was me and Anne. I tanked for her, so the two of us would get to see it. And I tanked it like not geared at all. Like I was going into Myth. We just did Mythic 0 just to get to the end of it. So that's a big change in how I'm playing. And I guess how other play, like, I don't think you can't gear in Shadowlands like you did in Battle for Azeroth.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm really surprised at how quickly the world first Mythic race concluded, because we were just talking about you can't gear like you used to.
We're splitting up and doing like they actually got up to a certain point on Denathrius and said, okay, stopped and went back to heroic on 2 split raids and farmed for more gear to trade to people who needed it. Like that to me is fascinating because that's not something you hear about them doing on previous. And obviously, you're not going to see as much of that when we get to the last raid in the expansion because players will have been running content the whole time to get the best in slot stuff as they go along. But that's the interesting thing about progression raiding. You're often in a raid with less gear than you might expect because they get there faster. For a lot of players, like when I was in the guild that did mythic stuff at the end of Siege of Orgrimmar, I was well geared because we ran a lot of content before we finally got to the last few encounters. But the people that are beating it are doing it as soon as they can. And that means they don't necessarily have the gear that your guild might if you ever poke a toe in there. They're doing it with what they've got. So that wasn't surprising to me that they did it. It was just surprising to me that they had the time to do it. You know what I mean? Like that they could do that while other guilds were still making attempts on Denathrius. They had the time to split up and go run heroic Denathrius to get the gear for their, because the heroic Denathrius gear is about the same as like it's less than mythic Castle Nathria gear, but it's still pretty good. And if you don't have anything in that slot, then yeah, it's better. So that was an interesting switch on my end. Watching that, I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah,
but that happened. The Darkening of Tristram event in Diablo 3 is back. It's the anniversary event for Diablo. They do it every year. They have for years now. So if you haven't done that, or if you haven't done it lately, there you go. You can go back and experience the content of Diablo, the original Diablo, in Diablo 3. They basically recreated original Diablo, and you can go do it in Diablo 3. I don't know why I'm amused by this, but I absolutely am. If they went and recreated the entire content of Diablo 2 within Diablo 4, I would find that really appropriate. I would think that would be great. And people forget this, that we used to play games that were X-length, and now we play games that are Y-length, and X-length game can fit into Y-length.
Mm-hmm.
One example of this that I thought was hilarious was, I don't know, did you see the Blair Witch game that came out last year?
Yeah, I did actually. I never got to play it. I wanted to, but I it's on my list.
One of the things that I find really funny on it is that your character has a cell phone, has an old Nokia.
Mm-hmm.
Nokia has that old Snake Chase game. You remember it?
Yeah, and you can play it inside of the game.
You play inside the game. You can literally just play that. You don't have to do any of the Blair Witch stuff. You can just sit there and play that phone game for hours.
Which is real funny because like that's a common trend in other video games too. Like even Cyberpunk 2077, you can play. There's a game based around Roach from The Witcher. It's an endless runner game that you can play in the arcades, and you can just do that for hours.
Fallout 4 had like multiple games you could play on your Pip-Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Were basically old. They were like adapted versions of like old 70s and 80s games. I remember thinking this is hilarious. But yeah, it is one of those things that when you see games actually have older games in them, that's cool. But anyway, yeah, if you want to do the Dark Tristram, I've done it already, so for me that's like, yeah, that's nice. But if you haven't done it, or if you haven't done it in a while and you want to get, like, for instance, you can get the Butcher's Cleaver cosmetic item. There's a bunch of other stuff you can get. It's kind of cool. I actually like it just because it's an anniversary event for Diablo, for the original Diablo, which, in my opinion, of all the Diablo games, the original Diablo gets the shortest of shrift.
I would agree. Yeah, it really does.
Like, people go on and on about Diablo 2, and Diablo 3 has its fans, but nobody stands up for Diablo, the original Diablo, as a game, and it was actually really good.
Yeah, there's a reason they made a second Diablo.
Yeah, and I played the original Diablo on PlayStation. Like, I had a disc that was Diablo for the PlayStation, and I played it on that. That's how I discovered Diablo. Was I was house sitting for somebody and they had it for the PlayStation, so I played it. And I thought, this is actually really fun. Diablo has never been super complicated to play, and that's one of the things I like about it. That it doesn't, as gaming gets more and more complicated and more complex, and all the Diablo games have been showing it. Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 each has been more complex. There is something that's always a little welcoming about the fact that Diablo does not actually, ultimately, what you're doing is fairly simple. Demons, smash them.
Yep.
And I like that about the franchise. I always have. And I'm sure, it's coming back in the fourth one, so yay. And also Diablo Immortal, it's all about that, so yeah. By the way, Diablo Immortal, the only news we have is that they're still doing the test in Australia. No new information on that one right now. Sorry, guys. But we also, we'll talk about this really fast, and then we'll move on to questions and stuff. We did a post. We've done a couple posts actually talking about it. Basically, World Quest gearing is weird.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's weird about it is you can be like item level 190, item level 200, item level 210, and your World Quest will still be item level 158 or lower.
Yep.
And that's because World Quests can scale up to a certain point, but they do a range of stuff. It's not like in Battle for Azeroth where if you were item level, I don't remember the item levels before the squish. My brain purged that information as soon as we got the squish. But if you were like a certain item level, you would get rewards up to the cap. Like, I think the cap was close to Nyalotha normal gear. Item level 100 once the scaling came in. I think it was actually item level 99. That was what it was when the squish came out for the emissary chest. And the rewards were obviously less. They were like item level 80 or so. Now, the current item level quest start at item level 148, but they cap at 150. I mean, they cap at 200. And they only cap at 200 if your renown is high enough. So there's a series of complicated things that go into what makes World Quest gear what the item level you see is. I've seen in the same day, in the same zone, here's a set of armor for item level 174. And here's a ring for item level 150.
Yeah, it's weird because like your cap raises of what you can roll, because every time a World Quest pops up for you, it's a roll.
Item level is determined at that time.
Yeah, and so like if you are at the renown cap that lets you get those extra high level stuff, you have the possibility of getting it, not the guarantee. And because they're not taking the basement out anymore, so basically in like Battle for Azeroth, in how it's existed since World Quests have been a thing really, is as your item level went up, that band moved with it, eliminating the lower tier. So like, just arbitrary numbers. If your original tier was 1 through 5, and then you moved up to the next tier, that tier maybe became 3 through 7. And so you never got 1 or 2 anymore. That doesn't happen here anymore. You always have the possibility, at least right now, and that may change, you always have the possibility of essentially rolling snake eyes on 2d6. It's a fascinating choice, and it's not one I'm sure I quite feel good about. Just simply because it feels like it makes world quests, which are already for a lot of people a tedious thing, even more tedious or less valuable. And I don't know if that was their intention or not, because they did talk about when Shadowlands was first released, they wanted to remove the pull from the game that made players feel like they have to play. They wanted it to be a choice, not a compulsion. And I'm wondering if that was the reasoning behind this, to keep people from clearing out their world quests and then waiting for more world quests to get that next thing or get that next roll. Because now it's not a 400 weapon. It might be a 100 level weapon. And so it's an interesting choice, one I'm not sure how I feel about yet. But I am curious if it's rooted in that make players want to play in some capacity, not feel they have to play. Although then it makes me question, why would you want to do world quests at that?
I don't think what I think it does is not makes people want to play, not have to play. What it does is makes people want to play other content that will actually give them rewards. If you look at all the world quests and nothing is an upgrade, nothing is anything that will help you, you don't do them. Or you'll do the ones that give anima, and that'll be it. And I mean, it's to a certain degree, if you have a calling that says do 3 world quests in a zone, and there's only like 4 or 5 world quests in that zone, your selection options are relatively limited. But callings don't provide anything like emissaries did. Emissaries, if you got a gear emissary, you were going to get an item. Yeah, even maybe it wouldn't be an upgrade because you already had an item of that type, but at least you knew I'm going to get an item from this. You don't get that from callings anymore. You might get
get trash for gold.
Yeah, conduit or trash for gold. So callings are like you're doing them mostly for rep and possibly for some anima or a conduit, and you're not going to bother to do the world quests that reward gear, which I think it's an interesting change, but it definitely prioritizes group content over open world soloing content. It's a shift in how World of Warcraft is. I don't even know if the rewarding is the right word. It's a shift in what it's trying to get players to do.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think it's fascinating, really, because you mentioned earlier that, WoW is trying to find its identity again, and this is sort of another piece of that. Like, for years, it was this big open world Skyrim-like experience where, like, there's so much to do, and players could feel overwhelmed by it. Now it feels like there's a lot more funneling going on, or at least attempting to funnel to see what players will respond to give a direction to go in. If you're playing now, you're almost playing through an evolutionary cycle of the game, because this is so different as far as like what they've chosen to do over the last 3 expansions at this point.
Well, I mean, Warlords was its own thing, but definitely Legion and Battle for Azeroth were geared around letting you play a lot of solo stuff. I mean, there was still group content, there always will be, but I definitely think the last 2 expansions, I mean, I remember saying it like in Legion, I had my artifact, and my artifact was just as good as any artifact that even a Mythic Raider had. I mean, he might have some Mythic, I forget what they're called, but the doodads you would put in it, he might have some of those. Usually, though, you could get pretty good relics just from running an occasional dungeon or doing world quests. So my artifact was pretty good. My armor was pretty good. Everything was good enough, and I didn't feel the pressure to run group content. I didn't feel like I'd be missing out. And there was a lot of focus on appearances rather than stuff like performance. And Battle for Azeroth definitely allowed you. Like I had like something like 6 alts at max level by the end of Battle for Azeroth, and they were all at around like normal to slightly close to heroic Nyalotha gear. From world quests and emissaries and stuff. And so it was definitely a case where like my main didn't get an upgrade in Shadowlands until like late Ardenweald. And I didn't replace my cloak until I was doing world quests. Like I finally got a cloak that was better. Item level 155, that was the cloak I switched to, because my cloak was better than anything that was dropping all the way through leveling. And as a result, it feels like now, the way Shadowlands is, you can't solo the game anymore like the way like you could. If you really want to, but you'll be way behind. It's much slower. If you're getting all your gear from the Covenant quest line, for instance, you can get gear and you can then spend anima to upgrade it. So you can get, you can eventually get there, but it's going to take much longer. And that seems to be what they want to do. They want to make, they want players to feel motivated to do group content. And I wrote a piece, like I said, I'm not decrying this. I just think it's an interesting change. And I think to a certain degree, it makes me question the way I've been playing the game this whole time. And it definitely feels like it's inspired by older World of Warcraft expansions. It honestly feels a lot like what they were trying to have the end of Burning Crusade.
Yeah, I was gonna say it feels very Burning Crusade about that, with like how
Like the end of Burning Crusade with the Isle of Quel'Danas feels similar in that regard. It feels like that's what they're doing here. But yeah, I guess at this point we've probably talked about this a bit. We'll move on to doing some of them their emails and questions that we get here on the podcast. If you have a question for the podcast, please, there's multiple ways to contact us. Please make use of them. The first one is to email us at podcast@blizzardwatch.com with the subject line podcast or Blizzard Watch, so we know it's for this show. If you send in a question that's for either show, it comes down to luck wherever it ends up. It ends up whoever sees it first. Joe might grab it. I might grab it. That's how that works. You can also go to our Discord, though. We have 2 channels on Discord. One is the Patron Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we look first because that's a whole thing. We look there first because patrons support the podcast and the website and keep us doing this. So yeah, we look there first. There's also a Q Questions channel, though, that we do look in as well for podcast questions. As is always the case, Joe's going to read them for us, so if you don't mind, Joe.
Not at all. And I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball today because obviously we do stream this live and there are people in chat. And somebody did pay to have a highlighted message today, and I think it's a good question. So I'm going to start with that one, which is going to be a surprise for Matt. This is from the Boojum. I do have something I've been meaning to propose as a discussion point. The dragons have the ability to shift into humanoid form. ProtoDrakes don't seem to share this. I'm curious if the Titans gave this to the dragons to provide their salvation in the form of embracing those forms or even mixing with the races of Azeroth. Matt, what do you think?
I don't know if that's a Titan granted ability or if it's just that they're all really good at magic, and that's a thing magic will allow you to do.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I was thinking of it, because like it's not inherently a Titan thing, but it definitely seems like a magic thing.
It's basically just polymorph. Just instead of turning somebody else into a sheep, you turn yourself into a human or whatever. And each one seems to have one form it prefers.
Mm-hmm.
Like Caligos seems to like being kind of a half elf. There was a Tirigosa in the same flight used to like to be an elf. A lot of them seem to like to be elves.
Chromie likes to be a gnome.
Alexstrasza likes to be an elf. Nosdormu, that's an elf he's trotting around as. Interestingly enough, Deathwing seemed to go with human a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly not your stock human, but that was a human.
Same with Onyxia. Like the Black Dragonflight seems to be more akin to human. Minus
what do you say Wrathion is? Rathion's a human, right?
Definitely a human.
So
Definitely a human.
I haven't seen any orcs actually, which I always thought was interesting. But then again, orcs are from another world, so it's not super surprising. We know one black dragon likes to be a Tauren.
Yep, Ebonhorn, my good buddy.
Yeah, and so that's interesting to me. A lot of the green dragonflight go with night elves.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of those. I don't know if it's something the Titans did or if it's just that they're so magically powerful that they've just gotten used to doing it. Like it's one of those things where, all these little humanoid things are doing stuff, and we want to like convince them to do the stuff we want them to do without actually just dropping down and screaming at them in dragon form. So yeah, I'm going to take this humanoid form because it makes it easier for me to interact with them. That being said, it's clear that they can become interested, at least romantically, if not actually let's have a kid in humans.
So canonically, we don't know if they can have kids with other of the humanoid races. Right?
That's not something that we don't know. I can't think of any established lore figures who are like half dragon or anything like that. We know that Caligos, for instance, fell in love with Jaina. I guess that relationship didn't work out. I don't know where they are.
He also fell in love with a well of energy too. So I mean,
the guy is very affectionate with everybody except the dragon that he was actually supposed to marry. Which I feel bad for her, quite frankly. Although she seems to be doing fine with Gerard Mace, so who knows? But there's there's been at least the occasional sign of it. Obviously, Alex Straza never, like, all of her consorts were dragons. It seems like if they want to reproduce, they stay amongst dragons. They don't go and find a relationship with a mortal for that. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. There hasn't been a lot of embracing of it that we've seen. There hasn't been a ton of humanoid dragon mortal relationships, and we haven't seen any children as such from them. So I don't. It is interesting to think about, but I don't think that the Titans put that in there expecting them to go and have offspring. I'm going to say that does not seem to be the case.
Now that they can change that at any point in time, because we haven't really had an expansion about nothing but dragons and their life cycles and everything else. They've been sort of interwoven into a bunch of stuff, but who knows? That may change in the future.
Yeah, if they did a Dragon's Isles expansion, we could finally find out how come ProtoDrakes don't do any of this stuff.
Or maybe that's where those weird human Draconoids come from, Draconoids that have existed, because originally we thought that they were just genetic tampering from Deathwing in Blackwing Lair. Turns out they naturally occur because all of the Dragonflights have them. Every single one of them. Where do they come from?
I'll point out that doesn't mean they naturally occur. We don't know.
Fair. I'm making the assumption.
There's been at least some speculation that you can, if you serve a dragon, you can be transfigured into one of those things. But to get back to that though for a second, we know that that ProtoDrakes actually come from drakes like the stone drakes in the elemental planes. Like if you go to like what is now Deepholm, there's stone drakes there. Those things are ancestral to dragons. And it's possible that there are drakes and there's fire drakes in the fire elemental plane, air drakes in the air elemental planes, and so forth that came to Azeroth before there were like strict elemental planes created by the Titan Forge. They could have come to Azeroth and been there, slowly evolving into flesh beings. We know that that's kind of where we get ProtoDrakes from. So why, ProtoDrakes were evolving in a direction that the Titans changed to make dragons. What direction was it? Were they heading in the direction that dragons are, or were they have been something else? There's a lot we don't know about dragons, drakes, and so forth. How do you get from a stone drake to a proto-drake? Why do stone drakes look a lot more like dragons do?
Mm-hmm.
Stone drakes look like dragons. They don't look like proto-drakes.
Most of the elemental drakes do. Like if you get like the one of the lightning drake, it's closer to a dragon than it is a proto-drake. Like how did all that come down? So they could probably have I was gonna say they could have a whole expansion about it, and I would not be mad.
No, neither would I. It would be nice to have an expansion where we got to talk about dragon stuff. Ooh, did I just disconnect? I did. I have got to remember to stay in the game more. Keep talking while I again.
Absolutely. But it's maybe one day we'll find out more about it. I would love to see some more information about it. Some of the stuff with Wrathion might lead to that later on. But yeah, as far as why proto-drakes can't do that, or why drakes generally can't transform into other races, we don't know that they can't. We just make the assumption that they're really dumb beasts, but we know that there's at least some level of intellect with them at some point.
Obviously, like Alex Straza and the other aspects were all proto-drakes at one point, and they were smarter than their average proto-drake. It's possible that's the direction proto-drakes were going.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, maybe proto-drakes were developing the ability to do that. Maybe there's a proto-drake out there right now that can do it, but doesn't see any reason to.
Or doesn't tell anybody, doesn't broadcast it. Because don't forget, a lot of the times when we first meet the dragons and they're in cover form, we don't know they're dragons. It's when we meet Chromie, I don't think the very first time we meet her, we know that she's
involved with the bronze dragonflight just because we know that they're ones who mess around with time. But yeah, Chromie didn't go around saying, by the way, I'm a dragon.
Right.
But it would be interesting. I mean, imagine if the proto-drakes can take humanoid form but just don't see much reason to. Or when they do, they don't, they're in Northrend, so they take the various Northrend races forms and, they go, maybe they sneak into a Vrykul town and spy on them for a couple minutes and get bored and go eat a bunch of chickens and then go home. You don't know. That would be. I would love to see more about proto-drakes, quite frankly, because proto-drakes can still have eggs.
Yes, they're not.
Proto-drakes, they're not sterilized by whatever the Titans did. I'm hoping that they just kind of quietly roll that back. Like
Yeah,
just don't reference it anymore. Yeah, we can have we're laying eggs again. We figured out we had to come here to the Dragon House, but it's cool. We're doing it now.
I would be absolutely okay with that. But I think we can move on to the next one that's not necessarily about dragon reproductive cycles. So the next
How is it possible we can have not an entire show just about dragon reproductive cycles? I ask you.
we could. I just don't want to. But our next question, hello, frozen people of the frozen people that watch. Lord Soth with an interesting Torghast observation. I was running Coldheart Interstitia, and I noticed there were both Mossworn, Kyrian, and Cavaldir in the run, but they were fighting each other, and not like training fighting. I noticed I was pulling aggro off of them from each other and onto me. This got me thinking, is this a hint that things with the Mossworn are splintered in some capacity? Are the different factions within the Mossworn vying for power over each other, and if so, do you think we may end up calling upon one of the various Mossworn groups to actually aid us in defeating the Jailer? Thanks for all you do.
No, I've been thinking about this since I read the question, because first thing that occurred to me is that we don't know that the Cavaldir are there as as servants. Yeah, the Cavaldir were Helia's main force for a long time, but clearly she's traded up. She may have very well, just abandoned them.
Listen, she had her starter Pokemon, and then she got the big, nice, legendary Pokemon, and she doesn't use her starter Pokemon anymore. She's not bonded with them. It's fine. She moved on.
That would be if it was Odin.
Helia kind of did that, just not as Odin-y.
In all sincerity, Pokemon aside, and I'm as down for a Pokemon discussion as anybody. No, I'm not. I don't play Pokemon. I know nothing about it. I do think it's interesting to see that, but I don't know what it means, because I don't know if the Cavaldir are there as Helia's servants or if they're just there.
Don't forget that Torghast is a prison too, and it's not just Mossworn and Cavaldir. Like, you can run across undead, you can run across various elemental forces that are fighting with them. There's a lot of weirdness as far as that goes, of like them fighting each other, but we don't know if they were given to there, if they were sworn to the service of the Jailer and then decided they didn't want to, or if they were prisoners at some point. Because don't forget, the Jailer's been looking for something. We probably weren't the first stop. There were probably other things that were way more readily available and way less capable of fighting back. And it's entirely possible that he has just a bunch of those things in the endless prison of Torghast, because that's what he was experimenting on. Cavaldir started as, Vrykruel, right? Like, before they died and went to Helia's service.
Yeah, the Cavaldir are very much people who died, and then Helia grabbed hold of them instead of letting Odin have them. Either way, if Odin gets them and turns them into Stormforged, or Helia grabs them and makes them Cavaldir, they're not going to where they're supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to the stream. They're not being judged by the Arbiter. This might be of interest to the Jailer. We don't really know what they're doing there. I haven't seen any Cavaldir in the actual forces of the Maw. Like, when I'm running around the Maw, I don't see any Cavaldir there. That doesn't mean there aren't some there somewhere that I just haven't seen yet. But it is interesting to think about, if they're there as part of Helia's forces. That being said, I also wouldn't be surprised if they didn't get along, because if the Cavaldir are there serving Helia, they could still be quite miffed that they've been relegated to, Torghast cleanup crew. Because like I said, Helia has been, dealing with her Mossworn Kyrian a lot more than she's been using anything else. And it could very well be that they feel slighted. Helia never treated her Cavaldir servants particularly well. Like, if you remember, I don't know if you played a warrior in Legion, but when you did the quest to get the War Swords of the Valajar, she's berating her champion constantly, even before you kill him and take the swords from him. She's berating that dude constantly. She's not a great motivational leader. Let's put it that way. She's definitely, and she's not at all particularly interested in the Vrykul. I definitely feel like she views them as servants,
Tools.
but not tools. Maybe not even tools, because you might be interested in maintaining your tools. She doesn't even seem to feel that way about them. But
Plastic cutlery, that's what they are.
She's not fond of them.
No.
She may be happier now that she's got her Kyrian. It might feel like she's got servants that are actually worthy of her now, and thus for who knows, there could be so much of a divide there. But I don't even know if the Cavaldir we're seeing are even considered servants anymore. They might just be prisoners. She may have tossed them on her way up.
Yeah, and or they may be trying to get back in service and they're just being told no. There's more we don't know about that. I think some of that's going to become more readily
We're the
accessible.
place. Yeah, we're the place where we don't even know what the next raid's going to be.
Hmm.
Like what raids and dungeons and storyline stuff are we going to see as this expansion unfolds? Are we gonna? There could be an entire like mini raid that's just going to find Helya's new wherever Helya is now and dealing with her to keep her from serving the jailer. Who knows? We have no idea.
Yep. All right, I think we can move on to the next one there. So since it's a thing we all wonder about, the whole alternate versions of characters are part of the same soul like a rope, is made up of all the threads braided together argument that Steve Denouser made back before Shadowlands went live. How does that work? So there's Thrall, and the evil, crazy maniac Thrall we saw at the end of Warcrafts. And when Thrall dies, he'll be held responsible by the Arbiter for everything every other version of himself ever did. I don't understand this. Can you guys explain it? And this is from Cooper of Steamweedle. This is a weird one.
Short answer: no. I can't explain. I don't understand it. I understand it in in conceptual. It makes sense. Like if you don't think of them as alternate timelines, because we're used to thinking of alternate timelines in a very specific way based on the media that we consume. It's very much the Jack Finney idea that these places exist and they're just as real. In World of Warcraft, alternate timeways are not considered real. They're not. They don't have the same validity. They're not the same place.
Gul'dan really was the first time they did anything that had solidity, right?
Yeah, well, Gul'dan was the first time that somebody came from another timeway into our timeway and actually did stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Other than like brief appearances.
And the entirety of the Meghar.
This goes, yeah, obviously, but that was after. If you go back to Thrall, Twilight of the Aspects, he goes and sees other timeways, but they're not. They're considered to be like here's a what could have happened, what could have been. Not this place exists and we can just go there anytime we want to, and it's a real place, just as real as this place. There's a feeling of unreality to it. So the Draka you see in Shadowlands is the Draka we've always known. It's not the Draka from the alternate Draenor we went to. But we went to an alternate Draenor and it seemed real enough, and we did stuff there. And obviously the Gul'dan from that Draenor and later the Maghar from that Draenor came to our world and did stuff and were real. I don't know if when that Gul'dan died, his soul was already part of the previous Gul'dan who'd already died. I guess it was.
Yeah, and this goes back to some of the Dragonflight stuff though too, right? Because like Warlords is still there canonically. It's still a planet that exists. It's not been erased.
Well, it might have exploded, but it's still there.
And
but it might have.
The entities that called that little pocket dimension or alternate timeway home exist in some capacity.
There's also like the potential. There's possibly an alternate Zera or some alternate.
Yeah.
We know there were alternate versions of the Naru. We know there was an alternate Velen who died. So yeah.
But this is the first time that's happened, and usually the Bronze Dragonflight takes things like that and pulls it back into the main timeway. And so it's almost like a fraying rope. So here's my take on it. That fraying rope thing I think is accurate. I think it's pieces of that rope, and in most cases you notice that one of those things is splintering off, and normally the Bronze Dragonflight would go, nope, get back here, and they tighten everything back up and keep everything moving in that one smooth wave. What wound up happening here is somebody essentially ripped off a portion of that rope to keep it around in a way that it can't be reintegrated, or at least hasn't been able to. So it is part of that whole. It started as that original piece of rope, but has become sort of its own thing and thus became real. And so entities like Second Gul'dan are capable of being there and dying or having a life.
Imagine a couple of hobbits going, but what about Second Gul'dan?
Not quite. Yeah, I don't think he's very delicious.
But for that matter, while you're talking about that, the possibility might be that it's entirely because of what Nosdormu did.
Mm-hmm.
And because Nosdormu tied together, his power to make sure that in all possible past, presents, and futures, Deathwing would never return. Which, might in fact have been what the old gods really wanted to have happen the whole time. To get the aspects to expend their power so that they couldn't use it to do as the Titans had created them to do and keep Azeroth spinning along its one true timeline. And thus now you can have alternate Draenor with its alternate people, whereas before the Dragonflights would have stepped in and folded it all back into the main timeway. Now suddenly these timeways can exist and can start having independent existence. What this means for souls, I can't tell you. I don't know. I have no idea. Unless they actually do something in Shadowlands that actually addresses this, I feel like it's going to be just kind of a look. Don't think too hard about it. It's literally their wibbly wobbly timey stuff explanation for how you can have 2 Goldons but only 1 Goldon soul, or in the case like 2 Drakas but only the soul of only 1 Draka ends up in the Shadowlands. That's their way of not having to deal with it too. In terms of how to explain it to you, I got nothing. I don't know.
Or maybe one's just dissolved into anima, because we've already seen that deeds are converted into essence of whatever they are and used as fuel.
Maybe maybe again, if the same soul exists in multiple incarnations, that's something we can do through time. Maybe it can be done through time and space. Maybe you can have 2 different Goldons. There's the same Goldons spiritually, even though maybe that there's a really kindly Goldon who did like only good things, and that's just because that's a potential that all Goldons had, but so few of them actually lived up to. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing that the Void Lords are always trying to argue for, isn't it? That all possibilities exist. That doesn't mean that you're a different person. It just means this is the person, this is the you that might have been. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's something we might not ever know, and like Matt said, maybe best not to dwell on it. Although, Steve and team, if you're out there listening to this, I don't know, an explanation might be nice somewhere. Maybe it might be cool. We're in the perfect place for it.
We'd love to do an entire show talking about it. So
yes, absolutely. Our next question here, and I think the last one we have, is come from our good friend Tetsemi. Question for the queue or the.
No, I think there's one more Lord Soth in there because I put it in.
Oh nope, you are correct. It was intermixed and not formatted the same way. My bad. But the next one, Tetsemi, question for the Q or the Blizzard Watch podcast. With Shadowlands, Blizzard pretty much went 180 degrees away from BFA's emphasis on faction war between Horde and Alliance. Do you think this will last the whole expansion, and or will the next expansion swing the pendulum all the way back to BFA levels of faction war?
I sincerely hope not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out if they do that. Like, I'm not even gonna lie. Like that'll be. I don't want that again. I would take a much lesser role in the game world.
I mean, I get that they feel like it is part and parcel of the setting, and it is always something that they want to preserve, and that's fine. But for me as a player, it doesn't breed the storylines that make me enjoy the game. I don't know, like I've said before, you can recognize the quality of something and still not enjoy it.
Yeah,
not you. I did not like The Shape of Water. I thought it was, it's clearly an achievement, but that doesn't mean I liked it. There's lots of stuff. Sometimes people mistake their personal tastes for quality, and that's one of the things that I find really bothersome. I think the BioShock games are not for me,
and I like them a lot. Right?
Yeah, I've yet to. My problem is that I have a really strong opinion about objectivism. So if you start doing an objectivist video game, I'm probably not terribly interested. I'm not interested in the Fountainhead where you shoot bees out of your hands. That is not the game I want to play. But that doesn't mean that the BioShock games are bad. It means I am predisposed to not being interested in the subject matter. Everybody has these things. There are people out there who just absolutely have no time for Star Wars. They don't care. It's not for them. That doesn't make the Star Wars movies bad. We can have a debate on that one later. But the point being, there's stuff that's not for you. At this point in my life, World of Warcraft faction stories are very deeply in the "this is not for me" thing. I'm not interested in them. Because of the nature of the Warcraft franchise, there can be no compelling resolution to those stories for me as a player. I don't feel like I get anywhere when I play them. I don't feel like my character gets to have closure or anything. But in Shadowlands, I'm getting to have that because it's not about the factions. It's about the after effects of what we saw in the last expansion.
Yeah, it's conflict with purpose, but it's not...
Conflict, in order for conflict to be interesting to me, again, this is all personal, and everybody's different. Joe has his own things, his own takes, his own interests. For me to find conflict in a story compelling, there has to be a resolution. It does not have to resolve in a way that I like.
But there should be a resolution.
There must be a resolution.
Yeah, I got you.
If at the end of the day, the resolution is that this awful thing happened and going forward, you will live in a world where the awful thing happened and there's never going to be any fixing it. That is a resolution. That's your character coming to some sort of emotional arc and making a decision and moving forth. Batman has had resolution on his parents' death. He can't fix it, but he resolved his emotional struggle about it. Now, it still comes up from time to time because it's Batman. But Batman, being Batman, is his response to the events of his life. It is the resolution. I shall become a bat. That's how he dealt with his trauma. He got from point A to point B. Point B is dressing up as Batman and beating up, clowns. I'm not saying it's the best, most healthy decision, but it is a resolution. If you can't have a resolution, if you can't get to a place where you take revenge or you solemnly swear to prevent this from happening, because there will always be more of it, and that's the faction story in Warcraft. There's never any point where say the humans of Stormwind and the orcs of Orgrimmar get together and just fight it out once and for all, and somebody wins. There can never be a story where they sit down and negotiate, and that's the new. You know what I mean? There will never be a new status quo. It will always reset back to we don't like each other because we don't like each other.
Yeah, and again, we don't know what they're going to choose ultimately, and they may choose to go back to it. The good thing about where we're at right now is that we are at a point of endless possibility for where they can go. Right? They can do any number of stories they want. They can create any new thing that they want at this point because they're not really tied to anything. So, to me, Battle for Azeroth almost was like I don't want to say a swan song to the faction where there's very clearly still tension there. There's still conflict there. That's always going to be part of it, and that's fine. But it was the last time we had a big all-out war between the two factions, even for a little bit. And the last time we really had that was Warcraft, really, ultimately.
Yeah, thing too. I am not saying that your faction choice is bad, whatever it is. I'm saying that there's not much to be gained unless you are willing to move to a new state. Warcraft 3 moved the world to a new state.
Mm-hmm.
The end of Warcraft 3, the Warcraft RTS franchise had gone from this is always us fighting each other to wait a minute, let's fight those guys. And that's kind of been the struggle that World of Warcraft has kept going back and forth between ever since. I would like it if World of Warcraft decided to do a storyline. If at the end of Battle for Azeroth, the two factions had made peace, as much as it would have been difficult for me to swallow, because, a whole bunch of civilians got massacred at the beginning of the expansion. If that was the path that we start on and things change from there, and by, say, 2 expansions down the road, you see Horde and Alliance units fighting side by side, and possibly some factions breaking up and new factions being born, I would be interested in seeing that. I would be interested in seeing lots of things. There's a lot of things they could do. It doesn't have to be the faction story. I mean, if you want to have that be just the default state of the world forever, okay. But then I feel like putting it on the front burner draws too much attention to it. It makes it if it doesn't ever get resolved, then why have it be the front burner? It's just going to feel repetitive if we're never going to change it or resolve it. Let it be the backdrop. John le Carre's stories were never specifically about the Cold War. The Cold War was just something that was happening in the background. They were personal stories. I feel like with World of Warcraft, the stories need to be personal. They need to be about what your character is doing. And if your character can't resolve something, then it shouldn't be the focus of the story. That's just my opinion. That's just personal. It isn't,
and it's not to say that anybody who thinks the other side is wrong or anything like that. It's just
there's lots of different ways to approach it.
Yeah,
I feel like you're asking me if they went back to a faction story this quickly. I feel like that's not enough time. You need a little time to get away from it before you go back to it. I feel like we had the faction story in Mists of Pandaria, then we had Warlords and Legion that moved away from it before we went back to it. I feel like you'd need at least 2 expansions before you should go back to it, at least. And quite frankly, I'd like them to go, but you need time for other things. So,
yeah, I agree with all of that. But again, who knows? It's It's their IP. They'll take it where they want to go, obviously, and we're just kind of here for the ride. The last question is from our friend Lord Soth again. Well, we finally have a clue as to what disabled the Arbiter in the form of a streak of red light blasting through the Arbiter. So I'm here with burning curiosity. I haven't reached 60 yet, so if it's answered later on, just tell me to keep playing, and I'll get there. What was the red light from? It seems to come from the souls being funneled into the Shadowlands. So was it an unusual soul, like that of a Titan soul we might have ended very recently? Was it an attack, and if so, who did it? The questions plague me like the plague that made me. Thank you for all you guys do. I feel like we've answered this a few times.
We didn't answer this one exactly because this one's been like on the emails, keep getting bumped for like a month now. I think by now Lord Soth has actually hit 60, quite frankly.
Probably.
But I wanted to talk about it because we've actually seen enough now. We've been through the storylines. The Covenant stuff has happened. I think at this point, there's practically no doubt that it was Denathrius.
Yeah, we know that throughout the dungeoning, we find that he was developing weapons, playing with the light, torturing things. It looks suspiciously like the anima that he has stored in the castle.
It does at the end of... I don't feel like it's a spoiler at this point. At the end of the Revendreth Covenant storyline, when you're just leveling through Revendreth, he basically channels all the anima in Revendreth that he's stored up into the Maw. He just shoots it in there. And if you look at the Maw after you've done that storyline, if you can find a place where you can see the Maw in Oribos, I can't because I'm not in the right place. But if you can find it, the Maw is different now. It looks much more angry and red and seething with anima power. So I definitely feel like it's related to that. But I don't know what it was exactly or how he did it. Based on what they did to the Primus, spoilers, I think that the Runecarver is the Primus.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's not been established yet. That's just my head theory. But based on me thinking that, I think it's possibly related. Like the process of what they've done to the Primus to make him the Runecarver is they've stripped him of his memories. And where do you get memory stripping?
Revendreth. Or not Revendreth.
No.
Bastion.
Bastion. There's a reason the Mossworn are important.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the Mossworn are rebelling against that, they understand how to do it. And I think that that's the piece of information the jailer needed in order to advance his plan. Like if the Arbiter the Arbiter exists, like right now, when we come to Oribos, the Arbiter stirs. Doesn't wake up, but stirs. There's a momentary flicker. It's quite possible the Arbiter doesn't remember how to be the Arbiter.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's also interesting because, like, in Bastion, the forces that are ostensibly sworn to the jailer and the cause are going after what exactly? They're going after the mirrors, and they're trying to stop you. Like, that's a big plot point from getting to them and using them because they have an invested interest in them, or they're keeping us from trying to discover something. But it seems pretty on the nose because when you see the vast majority of Mossworn, it's in one of those reflection areas. The dailies that take you there are in those particular areas of self-reflection and pulling memories out of yourself. That seems to be where they're focused. So I think you might be onto something, and I think that is a key. I would be remiss if I thought otherwise. Yeah, we don't... The problem, though, my friend here, Lord Soth, is that we don't know the specifics yet. Canonically, at this time, if you are done with Castle Nathria, you've captured Sire Denathrius, and you are taking him in for questioning. And that will probably be the point that we start jumping off and starting learning some of the answers to these questions. But right now, all we know is that it was something that blew through the Arbiter, probably made of souls because, you know, that's what everything seems to be made of here. And then Arbiter went sleepy time. So, and I don't think it came in through the normal soul stream. I think it was shot into it. So I don't know that it would, like, we get a lot that people think that it's the soul of Argus, that it's the Titan that we killed. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that at all. We've been pretty adamant about that, but I think you're okay, even if you are 60 yet, because I don't think anybody knows except for the team that wrote the story. So,
and we might find out more as future content comes in.
I would be very surprised if we don't. But I think that's all of our questions. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Unless there's anybody else in the chat who has anything they want us to talk about before we go.
No, I think some of the chat, and I'm looking at you over there, 6,000, have gone on some weird directions today. But Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your questions answered on our podcast with a queue, and an ad-free site experience.
Show. Again, guys, if you have a question for the show, you can go to our Discord, either our Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel or our Q Questions channel, and we can ask them there. Or you can email us at podcast@blizzardwatch.com, subject line podcast@blizzardwatch, so we know it's for this show. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. This has been the Blizzard Watch Podcast, and we'll be back next week.